everyone?
Rolling.
Okay. Hello. 네, 일단 오늘 이 먼 자리를 해주신 여러분들께 감사의 말씀 먼저 드리고요. 일단 저는 이번에 이 맡게 된 김연주라고 합니다.
Okay, so we are now live.
Hello, my name is Ashley, and I will be hosting this event for tonight of the Seen&Felt recital. Could everyone hear me all right? Okay. Yes, so first we're going to start by introducing our 5 artists and also our amazing poet, Neil Daswani. So we're going to take turns and first introduce our artist, Seen&Felt. 네, 작가님 네.
오케이.
이제 버퍼링이 하고 이제 권혜조 작가님, 임승환 작가님,
형님.
하고 이 자리에는 부득이하게 참석을 하지 못하셨지만 이 두 작품을 그려주신 이정도 작가님 또한 Seen&Felt에 참여하신 작가님들 중에 한 분이시고 이제 마지막으로 이제 오수정 작가님 겸 대표님께서도 계십니다. 하고 이제 저희 이 모든 작품의 시를 써주신 닐 다스와니 시인분, 네, 은행원이시면서 시인분이시기도 한 닐 다스와니입니다. Say hello, please.
Hello. 안녕하세요.
이제 오늘 이 자리에 오신 분들은 모두 갤러리스트의 지인분이시거나 이제 닐 다스와니의 한국 지인분들이신데 이제 여러분들은 이 코로나의 상황에서도 이제 여기까지 오시고 이제 특별하게 초대되신 트리플 VIP 분들이신 거 다들 알고 계시면 좋고 so like everyone here in Korea are either friends, visitors, collectors, etc. of the gallerists here. Also, some of them are Korean friends of Neil. And on the Singapore side, there are 3 attendees attending this event tonight. You guys are amazing VIPs. Thank you so much for attending this event. So yeah. Solo, we should say hello to each other.
So, say hello. Hello. 안녕하세요.
네. 이제 시작하기 앞서 먼저 갤러리 소개를 할 건데 이제 모델님께서 소개를 해주시면은 제가 설명을 하도록 하겠습니다. 이제 so we're going to start. Like before we start, we're going to have a quick gallery introduction by our gallerist Crystal, and I will be translating when she finishes her introduction.
저희 갤러리는 한국 현대인화들을 좀 이제 국내는 물론 해외에도 이렇게 소개를 하는 갤러리에서 뭐 퍼블릭 아트라든가 아트 컨설팅 이런 분야에서도 같이 사업을 넓혀가고 있는 갤러리입니다. 또 이번 전시 같은 경우에는 저희가 한국문화예술위원회에 이제 그 지원 사업이 있었는데 그때 이제 저희가 지원돼서 선정이 돼서 되게 감사하게도 좀 이제 후원을 받아서 전시를 할 수 있는 기회가 되었습니다. 그래서 이번 전시가 되게 뜻깊고 보람되었으면 좋겠고 앞으로도 저희 갤러리에 좀 관심 많이 가져주시면 감사하겠습니다.
So Gallery Gallery, renewed this time, is a Korean contemporary gallery dealing with various Korean contemporary artists. And for this event, the Art Council Korea had grants for a lot of galleries to apply for, and fortunately we were able to receive one of the grants for the event, to hold this event. So we very thankful for that this entire event could happen. 네, 그래서 이제부터는 이제 Seen&Felt 행사를 진행하도록 할 건데 이제 행사는 전체적으로 영문으로 진행될 예정이라서 이제 필요하시다면은 가운데 테이블에 있는 번역본을 참고해 주시면 감사하겠습니다. So we're going to start the event. Everything will be conducted in English with additional translation if needed. Yeah, let's begin. So here's the first question to you for tonight. I heard that you came up with the title Seen&Felt. So could you tell us what it means and how you got the title?
Thanks, Ashley. That's a great question. But before I answer the question, I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank all 5 of the artists. This is the first time I've seen 4 of them sitting in the same room, although it's virtual. I would have loved to have been in Seoul with all of you. And I'd really, a heartfelt thanks from my side, because without the art, the painting, the poetry would not have happened. So I thank you sincerely. 진심으로 감사합니다. So back to your question, Ashley, why Seen&Felt? And it goes to the very heart of the collaborative work, which at the end of the day is a synthesis of painting and poetry. And an artist, and obviously I'm not an artist, but I've come to appreciate art a whole lot more over the past 3 years in collaborating with all 5 of the artists for VUMA with you in the gallery today. And one thing that I've come to appreciate is that art is about seeing. So the artist sees an object, observes some scenery, or just imagines something and paints it. And so obviously seeing is very important to what a painter or an artist does. And you know, I don't need to tell the audience assembled in the gallery in Seoul all about that. But in many ways, I think it's beyond seeing. And in some ways, I think art is very much a multi-sensory experience. So if you just look at the title of our artist Ian Seob's latest album and his collection of paintings, which says the sounds a forest makes. And that's quite significant because it's talking about paintings and art, but through sound. So it's all very multisensory, and it is about feeling. And at the end of the day, every painting has emotion in it. Every painting's got feeling in it. And that sort of brings us quite nicely to the feeling. And so as I was toying with the idea of how do we come up with a title that'll cover 5 very diverse artists, from the very abstract to the very friendly and comfortable, and to an artist who does paintings on pretty much every country that she visits. And Seeing and Feeling sort of seem to cover it all. And surprisingly, people think that we got the title, or I got the title, from the quote that's at the back of the book, but it worked the other way. So seeing and feeling to seen and felt. And then we came across this marvelous quote from none other than Leonardo da Vinci, a very famous Renaissance period scientist and artist. And I'll just read it out to you. A number of you have bought the book, so thank you for that. A number of you have wandered around the gallery and seen the quote, but it's worth repeating. Painting is poetry that is seen rather than felt. And poetry is painting that is felt rather than seen. And that is really the essence and the reason, Ashley, why Seen and Felt as a title seemed very appropriate. That's a very nice segue, I think, into what I'd like to have as the first reading. And it's actually the first of, not only is it first in the table of contents, but it's also the first poem I wrote in this entire collaboration. So it's quite appropriate that we go to that first. So artist Lee and Siob, a marvelous painting, and it's from his collection From Nature. And the title is The Master. So here goes. The Master. A few strokes of that brush, almost as though in a rush, he grabs at pieces of the sky, bits of cobalt, still wet when dry. Yellow chunks of ancient amber float into the master's chamber. If you could see what he has seen, promises, promises, summer green. Thank you. Bit of a backstory there. When the exhibition where From Nature was being put up, I was traveling in Shanghai, and Crystal sent me a picture of this marvelous painting by artist Lee. And I was in the back of a cab, and I just like to connect it with what I think artist Lee's style is. And to my mind, artist Lee's style is very Van Gogh in nature, in that he paints in a hurry. I think his brushwork and his strokes are very definitive, as though there's no hesitation. And it's almost as though there's a camera at work and he's capturing what he sees and he's putting it onto the canvas. Fantastic sort of brush strokes. And that was in my mind as I was gazing at this painting on my iPhone. And the poem was actually written in the back of a cab in 5 minutes. So I just felt that to sort of indulge in a bit of humor and demonstrate my basic but very poor pronunciation of Korean, I thought that was very pali-pali. And that was, you know, his style was fast, so I had to write it very fast. So that's the backstory, Ashley, just for the benefit of the audience in Seoul.
That sounds lovely. I'm glad that you also wrote the poem Pali Pali. Yeah. So well, you're a banker during the day, but the book that you published is a poetry collection rather than some like bank finance related book. So could you tell us how you ended up creating a poetry, how you ended up publishing a poetry collection rather than a banking book?
Thanks for that question, Ashley. And as I look at the three members of the audience in Singapore, all of whom come from the banking profession, I can see two of them, though masked, are obviously smiling. The last thing they'd want is another boring manual on banking. So you can see the thumbs ups coming through. So I think, but it's a very interesting question, and it's about when we all start out on our careers, we enter, you know, various professions. I chose banking, and I've stuck with it. And I'm kind of showing my age. I'm to use again a little bit of the Korean I've picked up over the years. I'm just an ajashi, and I'm just, you know, I've been in banking for 35 years, and it's probably the only thing I know how to do other than write poetry. So your question is very appropriate. When we join our careers, we all bring rich biodatas or CVs, and it's about what we did in high school or what we did in college, and whether it's sports or elocution or theater or writing. And then what happens is whichever organization, typically in an organization, the organization systematically takes that out of you normally. I've consciously tried to keep that side alive, although I must confess I had to focus on my career. But there was obviously the 24-year-old who had joined banking tapping away at my shoulder and saying, I'm here. Excuse me. So basically, what happened there was COVID happened. And before COVID actually happened, I had the good fortune of meeting Crystal O and meeting artist Lim at an exhibition in the January of 2017 in Singapore. And we struck up a correspondence. I think she sensed in me the desire to learn more about art. I think both of them were so kind and collaborative that they started sharing their works of art and asking me for comments as a lay person. Obviously, I don't pretend to have any great specialization in art. So that was some of the background to it. And gradually that grew into a book of work over the past 3 years. But coming back to the essence of your question, banking and poetry, it almost sort of goes back to work and life. And I've got a member of this audience who was my boss for many, many years, who would say, I don't believe in this work life. If you talk about work and home, well, that's different, because work is so much a part of your life, and I kind of believe in that quote. What else can I say on that subject? Because it's a very interesting thing, particularly during COVID. What's happening to all of us is that distinction between work and home, if you want to call it that, is getting blurred. And so you've got to figure out whether it's living in office or working from home, and which is it? And sometimes we all get very confused and it's all very blurred. And I think part of that happened to me during COVID as well. But also, I realized that this was a golden opportunity for me to try and publish some books. And we had Crystal O pushing the agenda in Seoul, and behind all the artists, and that kind of happened. But it's a really great segue in this case to my next reading. And if you can see behind us, and I'd like to introduce my dear friend and colleague at the same time and request that he just stands up. And he tells me it's just pure coincidence that he dressed in gray. But as you can see, there's a picture there of a gray man in a gray suit. And this is a painting called Play Me a Memory. And that's a marvelous painting by artist Lim Seung-hyun. And it's just fantastic. And all of his paintings tend to be about, tend to be very comfortable. And if you can think of sort of comfort food, you'd almost coin the phrase comfort painting when you think of artist Lim's work. But that brings me to the poem. And the poem is called Vivaldi at Work. And I'll just come to that in a second. Yeah, here we are. So I'm going to read Vivaldi at Work now. And I'm hoping that back in Seoul, the cameras trained on this, but out here we've got the original and the collector, Sam Kumar. Vivaldi at Work. Gray men in gray suits until the end of their days will keep pushing pointless papers into empty trays. Tightly knotted neckties that strangle their dreams. The hum of white noise drowns out their screams. Marching to the beat of the corporate band, things unravel and then spin out of hand. The company anthem, sung in a monotone, words don't matter, just stick to the drone. But the fiddler bows only to the god of tune. From all that is hollow, he draws out a croon. Releasing the tension within his soul of strings, he'll play you an autumn, bring in the spring. So a bit of a backstory on that, if I may, Ashley. One of my favorite, or possibly my most favorite, if I had a desert island disc, it would be Four Seasons by Vivaldi. And I just felt that was fantastic, where you have this gray man, he's put aside his briefcase, and he's picked up his fiddle and he's playing. And in a way, it reminded me of me.
Thank you so much for your backstory. It's very interesting that coincidentally, Sam also happens to wear a gray suit. Very fitting. So now I wonder, what are your most favorite poems within this collection, and also what poem among these collections that gave you the most hardship?
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. But that's a really difficult and hard question to answer. I mean, I don't have children, as some of you know, but I have, 3 nieces, and that's like asking me which is my favorite niece, and the answer is all of them. So each of them has a very special place for me. I think each of them has a great backstory for me, at least, and each of them has been created by a fantastic artist, and the artists whom you know and love, and I've come to recognize their work. I've met some of them. I've met artist Ian Siob, I've met artist Lim, and obviously artist Crystal O, but I haven't had the pleasure of meeting the other 2 artists, but I hope to do that soon. But so for me, it's difficult to say this was my most favorite poem or my most favorite work of art. I think every one of them has been really special. But what I can say is, and I'll just give you a glimpse into my sort of creative process, if you will. Most of my poetry I write at pace. So, the word pali pali keeps coming back. I tend to write both meter and verse at fairly high speed. Most poems take me, sort of 15 minutes to half an hour to perfect. But occasionally, we all suffer from what's called writer's block. And what I can share with you is 2 poems that worked out really well. For me, I think they're amongst the great poems in this collection, though I say it myself. But in both instances, I struggled. And it was interesting, whenever I hit that kind of an impasse and I would discuss it with Crystal, she would say, Neil, that's because what you're trying to do is look at the painting, and you're trying to, your curiosity is aroused, you're thinking technically, you're wanting to know more about the history, the background, the circumstance. And she was right. And as I read out both of these poems to you, one by artist Lee Jung-gyo and the other by artist Kwon Haijo, I really struggled. So it, not so much with Hanbok, which I'm about to read out next. That one probably took me 2 days to complete. But with apologies to artist Kwon, the castle was my biggest challenge, and we'll come to both. So I'll read out, Ashley, if I may, the poem titled Hanbok. And before I do that, I will apologize in advance for any inadvertent offense that I may give to anybody in the audience in Seoul. I'm aware of the conservative culture. I've obviously not lived in Seoul or Korea, but I've visited it many, many times. So do forgive me in advance if I've offended anybody. But this was an artistic interpretation. And when I discussed this with Crystal O, I was hesitant because I said, I normally don't write poems with a sensual under or overtone. And this one had a mild sense of that. So, but nonetheless, let's, since we're all adults here, Hanbok. And as many of you know, Hanbok is the ceremonial robes, and for the benefit of the audience in Singapore, but I'm sure they know that, the ceremonial garb or robes that are worn on formal occasions like a marriage and other formal ceremonies. So this painting by artist Lee Jung-gyo is fantastic, just really rich in color. You've got the orange, you've got the yellow, but you've also quite clearly got the garment there, which is, you know, the black and white formality comes through, and the contrast of the bright yellow and orange struck me. And I wrote hanbok, and so this is how hanbok goes. Hanbok. Before I start, this poem is written from the point of view of the wearer of the hanbok, and in this case, it is a young lady. Okay. Hanbok. I wear my heart upon my sleeve. There can be no warp to my weave. Black and white make me look so solemn. Inside my hanbok, I am a flaming column. I'll melt like yellow butter to your orange fire. I hope this cloak of formality masks my desire. No layers to me save the hanbok I wear. Undo my binyo. The binyo is the sort of stick that goes through and holds up the bun of hair. Undo my binyo, I will let down my hair. There's a play on that. I will let down my hair. So that took me a while. And the first version of the poem was just about the garment. And I was talking about, I've kept a bit of it, the warp and weave, but I played on it. There is no warp to my weave. So, hanbok. I'll go straight into, Ashley, if I may, I'll go straight into the castle, which is inspired by one of the many travel poems of Kwon Hai-jo, who's a marvelous painter, and I've just seen so much of her painting. And just a bit of backstory there. I hadn't, from Crystal, received work of artist Kwon before. And then suddenly I got a flood of them, and I was writing almost a poem a day corresponding to artist Kwon's paintings. And then I came across Castle, and it took me a month. So this is probably in some way, the one poem in the collection that represents writer's block for me. So, The Castle. And for the audience in Seoul, you can see the camera is on the lovely painting, which is featured in a number of magazines on fashion and style in Seoul recently. You've got the rich blue color and the castle and the towers. So here goes, the castle. Towers and turrets stretch out to touch sky blue skies. Haughty windows look down through ice cube eyes. Down at the tourists outside, all gathered in a happy throng. Just listen to their chatter, joyous laughter, a snatch of song. They breathe in the magic that lies behind majestic doors as they walk on tiptoe across obsequious marbled floors. You can be a noble duke or duchess, but only for today. We are just actors performing the roles we are told to play. So we are just actors performing the roles we are told to play. So there's an aspect there of all the world's a stage, and we're just playing the role. So thank you for that, Ashley. Those were, for me at least, two of the toughest poems I wrote, but hopefully they've turned out well, and everyone's going to enjoy them. Which brings me to the fifth but last poet, who actually, but for her, this collection would not have happened. And the artist, I beg your pardon, Crystal O, and there are a number of her paintings that are featured in this collection. And I'm going to read you a very short one called Geronimo. And there's an interesting backstory to Geronimo. And part of my childhood was in upstate New York. And I lived very close to a Native American reservation of the Onondaga tribe. And I used to visit there quite often. And my parents, who are both linguists, were doing their PhDs at the time, and for some reason, strange reason, they were trying to study and understand the language of this tribe, which was the Onondaga tribe. And when I saw this lovely painting of a Native American warrior, and I said, "What's the title to Crystal?" And she said, "Geronimo." And I just said, "How do you know Geronimo?" And somehow I didn't expect her to come up with a title like Geronimo. And any schoolboy sort of my Ajashi age would have heard of Geronimo. And there are two references, again, for the benefit of the wider audience. He was an Apache warrior chief, and he was renowned for his ability to jump during the course of, in the thick of battle. He was able to jump from one horse, from the saddle of one horse to the saddle of the next, right in the middle and thick of all of that battle happening around him. And as he did so, he would yell out, "Geronimo." And this story, obviously, from a 19th century origin, found its way into a paratrooper lingo, or that's what they started using as the cry. So in World War II, paratroopers would jump out of planes deep into enemy territory, and before they obviously opened out their parachutes, they'd be, and as they exited the aircraft, they'd be yelling, "Geronimo." So, Geronimo. Halfway between hope and self-dare, your name remains frozen in the air, like a fervent fragment of a prayer. Geronimo's what they shout out loud, drifting down through wind and cloud, back to earth, standing tall and proud. So thank you.
Thank you so much for all these poems, reciting all these poems. You're fantastic, you're amazing. My last question for this evening would be, what is your future plan with this entire poetry collection, writing poems, and publishing?
That's an interesting question. Thanks, Ashley. Couple of things that not everybody knows. Coincidentally, what happened was the same day Seen&Felt was published in Seoul, I had another book published in Singapore on that very day. And, you know, talk about it, that wasn't planned. It was just sheer coincidence. And that's the book. It's Why Now. It's available on Amazon Singapore. And by all means, I'd love to share that with the wider audience and indeed a global audience. And I'd love for readers in Seoul who get interested in reading English poetry to perhaps look that up. As I said, it's available on Amazon. And the great news, although it's not immediately noticeable, but that was an effort by the Gallery Supermont and Crystal O. So a lot of the cover design, so my collaboration actually with the Korean artist not only was not restricted to Seen&Felt, and it transcended into the book I was doing in parallel. And so I'm very grateful to the gallery for having helped me design that book cover. And to complete the answer to that, if I may, again, a tribute to artist Lim, who, and I'm not sure whether that can be quite seen, it's the cover of my third book, and the title is Red Shift. And once again, the cover has been designed by artist Lim, and that's a painting by him, and the cover has been designed by Gallery Superman. So I do hope, Ashley, that my poetic journey, which began with Seen&Felt, which was obviously by its very nature shorter poems, because they were written in tandem with artists. They were written and juxtaposed to paintings.
the longer verse, which is in Why Now and Redshift, is what I've done now. There is another collaboration I've done with a Singapore photographer, and that's called Camera and Quill, which will be published early next year. So I've kept myself busy during COVID and beyond, and hopefully it's the start of a second career. So back to your question, which was banking and poetry. I think they can go together, and perhaps it's worth mentioning the name of T.S. Eliot. I'm sure a number of you have heard of T.S. Eliot, but he was the mastermind behind the poem that went into the musical Cats. All of you have heard of that musical. So the original masterpiece was actually written by T.S. Eliot, who was a banker and a poet. So thank you.
That's such an amazing story. Thank you so much for explaining all these progress, backstories, and reciting the poems. So before we end, we're going to have a quick Q&A from both Singapore side and in Korea. So if anyone who would like to ask any questions, please feel free to, and take this opportunity to ask our dearest poet, Neil Daswani, of any questions regarding this poem collection. 지금부터 이제 질문을 할 시간을 잠시 가질 건데, 이제 질문이 있으시다면은 이제 한국어로 질문하셔도 되고, 아니면 영어로 편하신 대로 질문을 해주시면 되겠습니다.
Congratulations on your first exhibition with the Crystal in Korea. I'm very excited to be here to join this event. And I have a question that 조금만 더. Can you hear me?
Can you hear Sylvia?
No, very poorly. So Sylvia, thank you for the question, but I'm not sure. Ashley, why could I request you to just repeat the question? That might help. I could hear you right throughout. So thanks, Sylvia, for the question, but maybe if Ashley repeats it.
Oh, she will repeat the question.
Hi, Sylvia.
Hi, Neil. It's so honored to see you in person.
Great to see you.
Even like in Portugal. I'm very happy to see you. So, you know, actually did a lot of great questions. I have a couple of questions that personally, how do your friends and family, can you hear me?
Yeah. Sylvia, if you can just come up a bit or come closer, I might just be able to hear you. Sorry about that, technology.
싱가포르에 있는 지금 지인들이 어떻게 이 익스비션 어떻게 생각하는지 궁금하고, 그다음에 이 포인트리 이번에 시를 한 거에 대해서 앞으로 계획이 있을 때 또 비주얼 아티스트가 또 할 계획이 있는지. 네.
So she asked two questions. She asked two questions. So the first is she would like to ask the audience in Singapore how they think of this exhibition and this collaboration with Korean artists. And the second is, in the future, if you publish or if you work on another collaborative poetry collection, which kind of visual medium or like which artists who produce like which visual medium would you like collaborate with in order to produce the second part of Seen&Felt?
Oh, wow. Okay, I'll take the second question first, if I may, and then ask my friends and colleagues to chime in for the first. Thank you, Sylvia, for both of them. Yeah, look, I think that there's every reason to have a Seen&Felt version 2. Yeah, normally, you know, sequels are never as good as the first, they say, but I think there's such a rich vein of artistic talent in South Korea that I'm sure there's plenty of material. I think we didn't leave any painting on the wayside, i.e. what I did was every single painting that I viewed, there was a poem for it. So I don't have a backlog that I can suddenly use for Seen&Felt 2, but in my bones, do I think that there will be a Seen&Felt 2? I'm absolutely certain there will be. I would definitely like to pay homage and my deepest respect to the 5 artists who, at times, it's just so wonderful. They shared their works with me before they went out on exhibition. And that is, you know, a mark of deep trust. And, you know, I was delighted that we could strike up that rapport. And I think, as I've said on the cover to Seen&Felt, art has a language of its own, and you know, we didn't have any need for an interpreter, and what you see is in your hands. It's Seen&Felt, and Seen&Felt 2 is sort of along the way, and I certainly want all 5 of the current artists, but I know there are many others, and I'd welcome exploring other artists as well as part of Seen&Felt 2. But in terms of my current plans, I've started work on a novel, and I'm also probably writing a piece for the theater. So I've got my hands full, but I will come back to Seen&Felt 2 for sure. And we'll go back to the first question in terms of what your impression was about the collaboration, about Korean art, and you know what that meant for the 3 of you. I think thank you, Sylvia, for involving my friends and colleagues. You've spoken by buying.
Actually, I'm very lucky in that Neil happens to be my neighbor.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. The sound is a bit echoey.
All right, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So look, I'm very lucky. Neil is my neighbor at the office, and we spend a lot of time together. I think it was only about maybe a year ago when I actually learned that he was, you know, writing poetry, and he's a poet. And he actually read me a couple of the poems. And then originally, you know, the thing that struck me was when he talked about Vivaldi at work, and then he showed me the picture of the painting. Yep. I think the 2 for me resonated really strongly. So, which is one of the reasons why I asked if the painting was still available. And thankfully it was, so I've been able to collect it. I'm very happy for that. But I think the second more inspirational thing for me was really, I think, before I spoke to Neil about poetry maybe a year ago, I probably hadn't read a poem in 35 years. Yep. So it was the first time, I think, after 35 years, I was actually encouraged enough to go pick a book on poetry and start reading poetry again. So, and of course, look, I spent a lot of time in Korea prior to COVID. So Korea, Seoul in particular, is very close to my heart. It's somewhere where I go to 3 or 4 times a year. So it's, you know, I think seeing that kind of partnership evolve is, I think, a fantastic thing.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Take my mask off so you can hear me a bit better. So similar to Sam, I only became familiar with Neil's poetry quite recently, and I find it so accessible. And what I've really enjoyed, so before the book was published, is kind of the combination of being shown the pictures on an iPhone, and then Neil would talk about the poetry. And I'm not hugely familiar with Korean art, but there's certainly some pieces here that I've fallen in love with, so I may become a lot more familiar. I do collect art, so yeah, watch this space. But yeah, I found it very enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. I think this has been absolutely fantastic. What I particularly like is these are 2 art forms, painting and poetry, that in some ways, as we go more digital, we risk losing. And what I love about this is we are admiring painting and poetry through a digital format. And I think that's something, not only is it digital, but we're across 2 countries where at the moment we can't travel. So it's absolutely incredible. I don't know where Neil gets the time to write. And now I'm beginning to understand it, because if he can whip up a poem like that in the back of a taxi, he has skills that are extraordinary. I'm particularly honored because Neil and I worked together for many years, and his book that he showed you, Why Now? Well, that's my poem, Why Now? Because that's what I always said to my team, why? And can we have it now? I was dreadful. But please keep writing, Neil, and please keep painting. We look forward to the next versions. Thank you very much. Editions 1, 2, 3, 4.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Thanks, Cap. Sam.
Oh, so
Ashley, back to you if you want to do a wrap up.
So Crystal has a question for Sam.
저 작품의 주인공처럼 일부러 생각해서 오늘 코디를 한 것 같은데 그게 정말로 맞다면 너무 원더풀 드레스업이라고 얘기를 하고 싶어요.
So she's not. Is it a coincidence or intended outfit for this event that you happen to dress up in all gray suit, just like the painting that you purchased by the artist Daswaniinin? And if that's the case, then she would like to compliment on your outfit. It's so perfect.
I think that's a really, really great question. I actually dress like that every single day. It's one of the reasons why the painting and the poem resonates with me so much. In fact, if you look at the painting, it's the same color of suit, it's the same color of tie. The only difference is the tie in the painting has dots on it.
Oh, we said, where's your briefcase? if only you had a briefcase, it would be perfect. And perhaps add like extra dots on your tie, then she thinks you would look just like the painting case.
Thank you very much. I will look forward to bringing the next tie that looks exactly like that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Neil.
Hi. Hi, Sarah.
Hey, Sarah. Hi. I just want to say that I used to work at Standard Chartered with Neil when I was in Singapore. And first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me to this wonderful event and allowing me to share this personal achievement with you.
Thank you.
I just had a quick question on how you work as a poet. You mentioned that you struggled a bit when you were writing the hanbok piece, maybe because you don't have that much information about the traditional clothes and it's a culture that you're not familiar with. So when you have to write a poem about something that you're not well informed of, how do you start off your poem? Like, do you research on the piece first, or you just write off what you feel and see?
Great question. I love the way you worded it, particularly at the end. Actually, that's exactly the struggle, and I wish I could have put up Hanbok 1. Actually, for a while, there was Hanbok 1 and Hanbok 2. And Hanbok 1 was very much what you've described just now, Sarah. It was very technical because I got into the history of when Hanboks were used. And I spent the whole cultural context.
Sorry to interrupt, could you speak up a little bit?
Okay, I'll speak up. So I was saying, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Sorry about that. Okay.
It's still a little bit quiet.
It's too faint, is it? Okay.
Good enough, yes. Please continue.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So Sarah, that's a great question. As I said, the first version of handbook was just too technical. It was about, the way handbooks were made, whom they were used by, and the terrible thing is when a poem doesn't land, and it's just a few words out of place, or sometimes you just go down a blind alley. And I think the first attempt at handbook, which was at night, it was, I think it was in, if I'm not mistaken, I was traveling in India at the time on a business visit, and I just kept trying to write it, and I must have done 3 or 4 versions before I shared what I thought was an okay version with Crystal. And she just said, nah, you haven't done it. And she said, normally you write with feeling, and there's just no feeling in Handbook 1. And so I went back and I wrote a completely different poem. And so, Sarah, if you think of it, I put myself in the shoes, and that's very difficult for me to do, obviously, not only culturally, but I was trying to speak from the point of view of the wearer of the handbook. So the sort of the combination of passion that she's feeling, but not allowed to show, and it's further masked by the formality of the heavy garb of the handbook. And so that was the whole essence behind the poem. I struggled with it, and I was very nervous sharing it because I'm obviously aware of the very conservative nature of the society there. So that's the backdrop. But it was a very good question. I wrote it ultimately from a sense of deep feeling, deep emotion, and I just kept a bit of the former poem in there, which, as I mentioned earlier, there's just a play on there's no warp to her weave. And the warp is not just, and there I can get very technical, and I'm showing my banking side. So for about 2 years in my banking career, I was financing, and my entire portfolio was financing huge factories that would make gray cloth. And they talked about the warp and the weft. And now I'm getting very technical, and I can see everyone chuckling because they know that about me. So yeah, I got too technical. The poem didn't land, and I had to step back. And the great news on Handbook was it landed the next day. I woke up the next morning, literally at 6 in the morning, and it just came together. I just said, look, I've got to write it from the point of view of the girl who's wearing this handbook. She's feeling something. She's feeling some sort of passion. And then obviously the last line I hesitated with was, undo my binyo and I'll let down my hair. There's, something obviously very sensuous about that.
Thank you.
우리 이렇게 하는데 화면에 저기 다 같이 어디언니들랑 우리 어디언니 다 같이 TV 옆에 서서 같이 하는 거죠.
Would it be okay to take a group photo all together, even though it's virtual? Perhaps everyone can gather in one camera over there and gather in front of the TV and take.
Yeah, it'd be nice if people could come around. Yeah, we're violating every rule on social distancing, but nonetheless.
Hopefully it's okay. It's safe enough.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, we all look there. Okay, fantastic.
You can see them lining up shortly. 연결선이 안 될 것 같은데.
I think your eyes smile.
선생님 아프다고 해요. One, two, three, taking.
Thank you.
Thank you.
감사합니다. 진심으로 감사합니다. Thank you.
정말 생전에
Thanks, Sujong.
It's like a whole new experience with this COVID situation.
Thank you. Thanks, Ashley, for hosting that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for hosting. Thank you so much for your event. Thank you everyone who attended tonight.
Okay, I hope see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, just take it.